September 10th, 2025. We are here for our annual budget hearing. And Mrs. Ettinger, can you please take the roll call?
Eric Brooks.
Here.
Natalie Gren.
Here.
Thomas Harland.
Here.
Betty Koenig.
Here.
Carrie Kozlowski.
Here.
Diane Voigt.
Here.
David Wad.
Here.
Anthony Zenobia.
Here.
Kelly Piasek.
Here. And Mrs. Ettinger, can you verify that the meeting was properly posted?
Yes, it has.
Thank you. Tonight, we are going to start by having Mr. Clark provide us with a summary of the 2025-26 preliminary budget. And after that, we'll open up the meeting for the public for input. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Clark.
Thank you. The district's annual budget development process actually began in the last November and will continue through late October, when the Board of Education will be asked to take final action on the 25-26 budget and tax levy. The preliminary budget has been published in the Waukesha Freeman, with hard copies also available in the district office located here at the Blair Administration Building at 301 Hyde Avenue. And it's also available in board docs and on the district's website. I'll walk you through a quick summary, but these are the agenda items. Just so happens that this year we are hitting the cycle where the state also passes its new biennial budget, and we'll talk a little bit about the impact that has on SDW. And then we'll talk about enrollment, the very advantageous debt, long-term debt structure of the district. And then we'll touch on the levy and the revenue and expenditures in total. So in terms of the purpose of this hearing, to me, it's two phases. One's transparency and accountability, and what the budget hearing does, and we're required to hold one once a year, as was mentioned, is to give the public a chance to provide some feedback on the status of the budget for this year. And then also, there's a continuation of operations part of it. The board has to approve some sort of budget, even though it's not the final budget, so we can continue to pay vendors, pay staff, and those types of things. So it's a dual purpose, but in my mind, the biggest part of it is updating the community on where we are and what we're looking at in terms of tax levy and budget, and maybe if there's unique things within this budget that we're adding, we can discuss that as well. So the state of Wisconsin biennial budget covers fiscal years 25-26 and 26-27. Kind of a mixed bag like it is every year for the district, but the revenue limit's our biggest funding source, our funding calculation. And how we are funded is by counting the number of resident students within our district and then multiply it by the revenue authority that the state budget authorizes for the school district of Waukesha. And for this upcoming school year, I guess it's the current school year, it's weird because we're 3 months into our fiscal year already, we will have funding authority of $11,650 per student, which is a $325 increase from the prior year. The most unique part of the state biennial budget, and it's not a revenue, can you pay your bills type of conversations, it's really about the impact on the local property tax levy. So the biennial budget did not include any increase in that pool of money for any districts in the state. So normally when they increase the revenue limit authority, they have, at least in recent history, have increased that aid offset to the tax levy. So on average, taxes have been held for the last several years. And this is the basic formula, again, to calculate the revenue limit. And this represents about 80% of our operational budget. So when we look at taxes, and we'll get into SDW specific tax levy forecast for this fall, there's an inverse relationship between if you lose aid, your levy goes up and vice versa, but there's no additional revenue with state equalization going up. It's strictly an offset to the local property tax levy. Some other funding categories. This is one that we've been discussing for a long time, and it's certainly a growing need in the district as special ed costs continue to rise. The demand for special ed services continue to rise. So the state did make a significant increase in the funding level. So they'll reimburse, last year they reimbursed 33% of special ed costs, eligible special ed costs. And they raised that to 42% in fiscal year 25-26. and then to 45% in 26, 27. Now, why there's another line in this slide is they based that off of last year's budgeted numbers. And when the actual special ed costs roll in, that percentage, because it's a certain amount of money, the percentage will actually fall back. So if you hear me talking about special education funding, what we look at in terms of what history has shown is it drops back a little bit from what Madison says it is. So we're actually budgeting 39% reimbursement rate for special educational costs. Open enrollment, SDW continues to have a positive open enrollment position that the delta between outgoing and incoming is dwindling a little bit, and we're certainly monitoring that. But as of now, as a positive OE district, this is advantageous to our revenue stream. So now I'll go into a quick summary of the actual preliminary budget. Again, I'll start with a topic that we've been hitting on a lot the last several months and hit on every year, is the revenue limit calculation and how important enrollment is to the funding of a school district. If the property valuation grows in the district, we get no additional funding. It's strictly a number of kids in our district times the amount that the state allows us to generate via the local tax levy or state aid. And then once you have that revenue limit authority calculation, you deduct equalization aid, and that's how you calculate the local property tax levy. So school finance, this is the heart and soul of everything we talk about in terms of the fiscal picture of the district. In terms of the membership count, now this includes summer school. We count the minutes and then calculate out the impact and the number of kids equivalent. And then we get to count 60% of the 4K population. So all that rolled in, we're looking at a reduction in our membership count from 24-25 of 10,996 students down to 10,854. That's based on our third Friday pupil count in September going down a projected 2%, which has been our average going forward. To give you kind of a reference point in terms of how our resident enrollment count has gone, in fiscal year 2013-14, our membership count was 13,071 students. And again, we're projecting to be at 10,854 students this fall. It's different than the optimizing the future conversation. That's an on-site, how many kids are in our schools conversation. So there's different counts. The resident pupil count is, I'm the only one who's interested in that because it's strictly a financial exercise. So if you're wondering why are these numbers different than optimizing the future and what we maybe been looking in that data, it's two distinctly different counts occurring. So if you have any questions on that, you can always reach out to me and I'd be glad to talk people through it. This slide I put in every presentation, it seems like I do. This is our third Friday only pupil count going back to 2008. And we topped out in the fall of 2012 at 13,143 students. The last hard figure we have is the fall of 24, where we were at 10,559. So that trend line, as you can see, continues to go down, just like our on-site enrollment continues to go down. They're related but different. So I thought it was important to give you a little history on that. Some good news, and I think it's pretty unique when you consider we're the 7th largest school district in the state of Wisconsin. We are scheduled to pay off all of our outstanding debt on April 1st of 2026. I haven't run the numbers lately, but if you've tracked any of the referendum activity that's been out there, there's very few districts that have no debt whatsoever, much less being a district of our size. So I think that's something to be noted. The structure we took, because we were paying off our debt in 7 years instead of 10. Most districts pay off long-term debt in 20-year bond issues. But when we talked about this fall is how do we position ourselves to have the best tax levy for this year and then for the following year. So in the green shaded cells, the 24-25 levy for debt service payments was $7.9 million. And then we lowered that, because this is all we needed, to 2.3 this fiscal year because we thought it would protect us from on a local tax basis, negative impact from the state biennial budget. It turns out that that's going a long ways to offsetting what came out of this, out of Madison. And then we also plan to have another $2.3 million estimated drop in the levy for the 26-27. So when this was all finalized over a year ago now, we really thought we were positioning ourselves to bring a lot of stability to the tax levy. So the preliminary taxes, so in 24-25, there's the equalization aid and what the levy ended up being. In June, I provided the Finance and Facility Committee an estimated tax levy increase because I wanted to get a feel of where we were going, but we didn't have the outcome of the state biennial budget at that point. So what we did is we assumed aid would be flat from the prior year. Generally a pretty conservative or natural thing to do in terms of projecting out. And at that time, I thought we would be at a negative 3.6% levy increase. But as I mentioned earlier, we got new revenue limit authority through the new state biennial budget, but there was no increase in the pool of money that would be distributed in the form of equalization aid. And actually on July 1st, DPI came out with their estimate for us, and it actually showed a decrease in equalization aid of $5.9 million or 9.21%. And you can see what happens to the tax levy. Again, there's that inverse relationship between the two. There's no new revenue in what's in our preliminary budget from what was presented in June. It's the exact same revenue limit calculation. It's just a matter of what the sources are to get you to that revenue limit, full revenue limit authority. So you're just shifting aid and levy dollars in this slide. So with that, we're now looking at a 3.77% increase. But I think it's important to know that if the state would have held our aid where it was, we would have that negative 3.65% drop in the tax levy that we all envisioned when we developed the final financing plan to pay off our debt. So I tried to do an analysis of state aid and the changes and the fluctuation. It's not an easy thing to do because there's so many variables involved. So I gave it a shot, but when you're also defeasing debt and doing all these things, it's hard to analyze it against the total tax levy because there's these other things going on. So what I did is I just developed this chart, and the second column is our certified state aid amounts. And I think what I'm hoping you garner from this column is the numbers are all over the place. In 21-22, we were at $52 million. Then we were at the $57 million range for a couple years. Then we went up to $63.8 million, and now DPI is projecting that we'll be coming back down to about $58 million. And there's really no way for a local school district to accurately project what that number is going to be because it's based on all the property valuation changes in the state, all the enrollment changes in all the school districts in the state, and then the pool of money that the state of Wisconsin allocates for equalization aid. So it's always a really tricky number. So next to it, I put what our revenue limit authority was that same year. And then I said, well, how much of our revenue limit authority is being funded by certified equalization aid? And it starts out at 40.2%, and then goes up to 45, 43.5, almost 47, and then 41.8. The two rows where I have two numbers there, there was two significant adjustments in aid due to poor state reporting by some school districts in the state of Wisconsin to allow them to finalize it. So, but it went both ways. One year they took about $850,000 of aid from us. The next year they came back in 24-25 and they gave us $1.5 million. I think they gave us what they shouldn't have taken away the year before, and then it was built into the following year. So it provided these swings. So the overall message here is we are trying our best to provide stability and as minimal of taxation as we can, but we're not ultimately in charge of how that aid formula works. We're not in charge of what other districts spend on new referendums and debt. There's a lot of variables that we're just part of a really large calculation, and we're just one of 426 or 424 school districts in the state with their own calculation. And so hopefully this helps. I kept trying different approaches to this, but I just want to stress that we do our best to come up with the best estimate to present here tonight. So here's the preliminary tax levy summary. Again, we're looking at a 3.77% tax levy increase. The line that says debt service Fund 39, next year that will be zero. So there will be another drop in taxation in that category. Again, we don't know what aid's going to be for our general fund. We're assuming a property valuation growth of 5%. I think that might be a little light, so that you might see that number change as we get to the final one. And then the tax rate based on all these assumptions would drop from $5.32 to $5.26, or just over a 1% drop in the tax rate. Usually people measure taxation by a piece of mail they get every December, so I'd like to provide some history of what we've done with taxation, and I measure it in terms of levy. So over the last 3 years, and I'm only going through last year because we haven't finalized this year's budget, over that 3-year period, property tax levy has dropped on average 3.26%. The 5-year average has dropped 1.47%. And the 10-year average was an increase of 0.64%. Now, there was a lot of ups and downs over that 10-year period, so it only went up 0.64% every year. But I think overall we've done well, especially when you consider in the middle of all this, we paid off, not only improved our facilities, but paid off that debt or are about to pay off that debt during that time. And here's a summary of all of our funds. Our accounting structure is dictated by the state of Wisconsin. Again, I would like to point out that Fund 39, this year we are budgeting revenue of $2.35 million and expenditures of $11.3. Those lines will be zero next year. So you'll see a significant drop in our expenditures, total expenditures. And then lastly, even though we're 3 months into, or almost 3 full months into our fiscal year, we still have a ways to go. Tonight we're here at the budget hearing. September 19th is the third Friday pupil count at all of your schools. Please make sure your kids are there that day. October 6th, I'll present to FNF any updates we have or a near final budget presentation. And then between October 1st and the 15th, we find out our property valuation, and most importantly, we find out on October 15th what our equalization aid, so I can finalize the tax levy calculation. And then at the end of the 4th month of our fiscal year, the board will approve the final budget and tax levy. So with that, in looking at the preliminary budget and related tax levy, it's important to note that this is, to keep in mind that the budgetary assumptions used to create this preliminary budget were based on the best available information in early August. And actually, we finalized the budget in July prior. We built in a lot of what was in the new state biennial budget. We still have some work to do before October. And then I always try to note that this budget is in full compliance with state of Wisconsin revenue limit legislation. And that completes my summary.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. The public hearing this evening is an opportunity for the members of our school community to share their thoughts and provide input on the budget that has been presented. As mentioned earlier, the final budget and tax levy will be approved and adopted at a future meeting in late October. Though tonight is the public's formal opportunity to provide input, I want to invite all the members of our school community to reach out to Mr. Clark, the district CFO, at any point in the budget development process to share their thoughts and insights. At this time, the board will receive comments from those wishing to speak to the preliminary budget this evening. Do we have any speakers who signed up to speak this evening?
I don't believe we did.
I don't believe that we did. I just want to clarify with the secretary.
No, there are no speakers signed up for the budget hearing.
Thank you, Ms. Settinger. Seeing no speakers, that will conclude our preliminary budget hearing for this evening. Thank you.